Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. A question has to be asked. How committed is unbeaten American contender Jarrell Miller to the Dazn streaming service platform? And I asked that question following some comments that Miller himself has made to media in Belize. So I'll get to that in a moment. But for context, in July, Miller was one of the fighters showcased at the launch of Dazn USA, and that event, of course, was memorable for the confrontation that Miller had with Anthony Joshua. It's actually unclear how many fights that Miller has signed for with Dazn, but what we do know is he's going to be fighting in October, on October 6th, in Chicago. So in doing some research for an issue that I'll be touching on later, which relates to Miller's great UK disappearing act, I stumbled on some comments that Miller had made himself to 7 News Belize. So he was asked, what's happening in October? To which he responded, October 6th, we fight in Chicago. We will see how long we stay there, because I prefer Showtime or HBO, because they'd been around a long time. Gerald Miller's statement, or one of his statements to 7 News Belize that he made on arriving in the country. So it's not exactly that statement from Miller, not exactly a ringing endorsement for Dazn, is it? If I were to hazard a guess, I'd say Miller, he's on a 1 or 2 fight deal, max, and he wants to keep his options open. And given he's on the cusp of getting some big fights, it would make a lot of sense, because he doesn't want to hobble his potential commercial worth by locking himself in for too long, not while he's sort of on the upward swing. But openly saying you prefer HBO or Showtime when you've just signed for a new streaming service platform, that's poor form in my view. It's actually in his interest, now that he's with them, to talk it up, and you would expect him to do so. But I would note, not once in the transcript of the interview did he mention Dazn. You could look at it this way though. Perhaps Miller is playing hardball with Eddie Hearn, and he might only get on board the Dazn train fully if he's paid accordingly. He wants to get paid well. He's told us this publicly. And we know his highest payday, it's just over $200,000 US. So you'd imagine he'd be getting paid for this next fight coming up in October. But how much more? That's the big question. So looking at the situation, it would appear that Miller is sort of in that testing the waters category with Dazn at this point. And Eddie Hearn, who's the frontman for the platform, he may see a little bit of this in the early days of the streaming service as it starts, until it picks up some momentum. But back to Miller. He also gave his take on the confrontation with Anthony Joshua at the Dazn launch, saying Anthony Joshua got cop out of the fight, a short little leprechaun Russian guy. But they thought I wasn't going to show up to the press conference. I was just late. I had some things to take care of, but I let them know I'm serious. He is beating around the bush. He don't want anyone that's going to bring it to him. He's not used to confrontation. Pretty standard stuff from Miller, but I guess, I'd never heard Alexander Povetkin compared to a leprechaun before. But as we know, that confrontation with Joshua, it built a lot of buzz for Miller, who was then, and I'm moving into this other issue that I wanted to get to, after the buzz built, he was then confirmed he was going to be guest commentator for Sky for the Dillian Whyte and Joseph Parker fight the next week. He was going to be attending all the fight week activities, giving his insight and all that sort of stuff, and would have been doing his thing on fight night with some expert commentary. But it never happened. It was only sort of towards the end of the fight week that I thought, hang on a minute, where's Miller? He was meant to be there. And at the time, I did a bit of a search for any news, and it sort of came up drawing a blank. And you might have also been wondering, what happened to Jarrell Miller? We all sort of expected he might sort of cause a bit of a stir in one of the press conferences or at one of the events. But, there was a lot going at the time, so I think it's just sort of, for a lot of us, just sort of, passed us by, and we didn't give too much thought to it. But in recent days, I've had a few questions sort of in various comment sections asking, well, what did happen to Miller? And someone had suggested there may have been some threats against him because of the Anthony Joshua stuff. Obviously, Miller was going in and sort of talking about Joshua's mum, taking her out on a date and all sorts of things. So I decided I'll have another hunt around. This is where it gets a bit weird. So I checked out Miller's social media, and it's been rather quiet in the last 10 days or so. But the tweet that he had put out about going to the UK, it was still up, and here it is. However, the Sky Sports boxing tweet that he'd linked to, it wasn't there in the tweet. You can see this here. It says it's unavailable. But if you click through, see, it says it does not exist. And then I Googled for the story that Sky Sports had put out at the time. So the search record, it still exists. And, Auntie Google has come up with this, and you can see it here. But then when you click through to go to the story, it's gone. So Sky has gone and deliberately deleted any content related to Miller coming over to commentate for them. And just to jog your memory, that story had Adam Smith waxing lyrical about Miller, saying he's a fascinating and modern addition to our excellent team of analysts. He's huge charisma, strong opinions, and is obviously an enticing and very lively member of the new heavyweight brigade. And I knew it said that because I quoted it at the time. So what has gone on for them to completely delete and expunge any mention of Miller and that trip which was on, and then all of a sudden it wasn't, and no one has said a thing? It's really quite bizarre. Is it in fact some blowback from the Joshua situation? Is that the real reason? I think I'm going to have to put in a request to Sky to try and see what I can get back, but I'm not going to hold my breath. But this whole thing, it's a little bit cloak and dagger, and Miller himself has gone ghost on this, and he's seemingly made no public statements or mention of what's happened. It's very strange. What do you make of it? But just on Miller's Chicago fight, which is October the 6th, so Tomas Adamek, that's a name that's come up as a possible opponent, and it's been mentioned a few times in recent days. And you'd imagine that his name is now being mentioned because, he's Polish and Chicago has strong Polish links. And the 41-year-old Adamek has told FightNews.com, "I could fight Jarrell in Chicago. Why not? Fans would not be disappointed, because I like to do some hit and dance in the ring, and Jarrell is a true old-school heavyweight who is just like me, not afraid to mix it up. Great fight to watch. In one of his last fights, he beat Marius Vach, who is a friend of mine, and like my chances against Miller's style. Busy jab, straight rights, some left hooks. Miller gives you a chance to hit him, and I've always been known to be a very opportunistic guy. Give me an opening, I will make you pay." And Adamek's manager, he also added in the same story, "Miller makes sense for both fighters, especially in Chicago." When people are talking Adamek now, they talk about his age, 41. It's a mistake. Fans should watch his fights, make their own opinion. But one who's voiced their outrage on this potential matchup is ESPN's Dan Rafael, labelling it a disgraceful mismatch. He went on to add in a brief piece, "Because Adamek, a former light heavyweight and cruiserweight world title holder, is a hugely popular Polish fighter, and the card is in Polish heavy Chicago, he is being fed to Miller, who was on the verge of a world title. Some close to Hearn have voiced their concerns over how much of a gross mismatch the fight is." Okay, so my view on this, and I haven't exactly been lenient on Miller in recent months. I've been getting sort of sick of the big sort of talk, and then obviously looks to fight faded contenders. So my view is it would be a clear mismatch. Maybe I'm not quite going as far as sort of Big Dan there sort of saying disgraceful mismatch, but it would be another signal that Jarrell Miller does not want to fight any contender of note, anyone with a pulse right now, because he wants to take a cautious and soft route to a title shot. And that's not new in boxing, but in Miller's case, with his mouth and talking it up large, saying how great he is, it just doesn't work. He can't go on social media and in the media saying he's a top 3 heavyweight, how great he is, and then go fight Adamek. Those things just don't add up. And I also hope we don't have Eddie Hearn coming out if this fight is made, telling us what a great matchup it is and that it's a 50-50 fight. Because he tried to sell us down the river on the Duopa fight that was a 50-50. And I said at the time, it wasn't a 50-50. And sure, Dorper was competitive for 6 rounds, but he got blown out in the final 6, and it was a lopsided points win. Miller was always in the driving seat with that fight, and he will be with this one too. And as I've discussed with one of my subs, Adam Fahey, Miller is he's developing this sort of type of opponent that he likes to fight at the moment, which is, he's being fed a diet of European former title challengers who are well on the slide. And think Wok, think Dorper, and now potentially Adamek. And we also can't forget that just a few weeks ago, he was also talking up the prospect of facing Artur Spilka, another European former title challenger. And given how I started off this video, with his comments regarding his preference for HBO or Showtime, who's to say he's not going to actually bolt after a soft fight or two on Dazn and then go to one of them? What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.